When Mercy Whitmore's strength finally gave out in the freezing snow of Copper Falls, only one door opened to save her and her unborn child from the merciless Montana winter of 1869. But as the weight of the town's judgment threatens to crush the fragile hope she's found, will one family's courage be enough to shelter her from the storm of human cruelty? The sound of Mercy's empty stomach growling cut through the howling wind like a wolf's cry in the Montana wilderness. She pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick restlessly inside as if it too knew they were in terrible danger. The year was 1869, and the December snow in Copper Falls territory fell so thick she could barely see the wooden buildings ahead of her. Her worn-out boots slipped on the icy ground as she stumbled forward. Each step sent sharp pain shooting up her legs, but she couldn't stop now. Not when she was this close to the town. Not when her baby's life depended on finding help before the deadly winter storm got worse. 3 days had passed since her last real meal, a piece of stale bread from a farmer's wife who had taken pity on her. For days since she'd left the last town after being chased away by angry shopkeepers who called her a beggar. The memory still stung worse than the freezing wind hitting her face. Mercy pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it was like trying to stop a river with a handful of stones. The cold went right through the holes in her coat, making her teeth chatter so hard she bit her tongue. The taste of blood mixed with the fear in her mouth. She thought about her husband James, dead now for 6 weeks from a cave-in at the silver mine. His last words to her had been about the baby. "Take care of our little one, Mercy girl. Promise me." She had promised, but keeping that promise was harder than anything she'd ever done. The lights from the town windows looked like tiny stars through the falling snow. Warm, golden light that meant families were inside, safe and fed. Children were probably playing by their fireplaces while their mothers cooked dinner. The thought made her stomach twist with hunger and loneliness. A sudden pain shot through her back, making her gasp and grab onto a fence post. The baby was getting restless, moving around like it was trying to find a more comfortable spot. But there was no comfortable spot anymore. Not since James died. Not since the mine owner kicked her out of the company house with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few coins that were long gone now. "Hold on, sweet baby," she whispered to her belly. "Mama's going to find us somewhere warm tonight. I promise." But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her heart like the cold creeping through her coat. What if nobody in this town would help her either? What if they took one look at her dirty, pregnant, and alone, and slammed their doors just like all the others? She forced herself to keep walking, even though her legs felt like they were made of lead. The main street of Copper Falls stretched out before her, lined with houses that looked bigger and fancier than any place she'd ever lived. These people had money. Surely one of them would have a kind heart. The first house she came to had smoke curling up from its chimney and the smell of roast beef drifting from its kitchen. Her mouth watered so much she had to swallow hard. She climbed the steps to the front door, her hand shaking as she raised it to knock. Before she could knock, the door opened. A woman in a silk dress stood there, her hair pinned up perfectly and her face clean and smooth. She looked at Mercy with the same expression someone might have when finding a dead rat on their doorstep. "We don't have anything for your kind," the woman said quickly. "Try the church down the street." The door slammed shut so hard it rattled the windows. Mercy stood there for a moment, staring at the painted wood, feeling like she'd been slapped. But she couldn't give up. Not yet. The church was locked up tight, no light in the windows. The house next to it belonged to the preacher, but when she knocked, he barely opened the door before starting to lecture her about the sins that led to her condition. He didn't even ask if she was hungry or cold. "A decent woman wouldn't be wandering around alone in such a state," he said, his voice cold as the wind. "Perhaps you should think about what choices brought you to this situation." Another door slammed. Another rejection. Mercy felt tears freezing on her cheeks, but she wiped them away with the back of her hand. Crying wouldn't help the baby. She had to be strong. The third house belonged to a shopkeeper whose wife answered the door. This woman at least looked at her with something that might have been pity. But when Mercy asked for just a scrap of food, the woman shook her head. "I can't encourage this kind of behavior," she said. If I give you something, you'll just expect it from everyone else too. What you need is work, not charity. Please, Mercy tried to say, but the woman was already closing the door. I just need work, the woman said firmly. That's what you need, not handouts from decent people. The door closed with a final click, leaving Mercy alone in the growing darkness. She stood there, swaying slightly, as the snow continued to fall harder. The baby had gone quiet inside her, and that scared her more than anything else. When babies went quiet, it usually meant they were in trouble. The fourth house on the street belonged to a man who sold grain and seeds. Mercy could smell soup cooking inside, thick and rich with vegetables and maybe even meat. Her stomach made such a loud growling sound that she was embarrassed, but she forced herself to knock on the door anyway. When the man opened it, he took one look at her and his face went hard. No, he said before she could even speak. Whatever you're selling or begging for, the answer is no. We work for what we have around here. Sir, please, Mercy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not asking for money, just a small bite of food. I haven't eaten in days and my baby. Your baby is your problem, not mine, the man said. Should have thought about that before you got yourself in this situation. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff. The door slammed so hard it shook snow off the roof above her head. Mercy stumbled backward, nearly falling down the porch steps. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the rough treatment, and she had to lean against the railing to catch her breath. At the fifth house, she didn't even get a chance to explain. The woman who answered took one look at her and stepped back like Mercy had some kind of disease. Absolutely not, the woman said. I have children in this house. I won't have them exposed to whatever situation you've gotten yourself into. I'm not sick, Mercy tried to explain. I just need. But the woman was already shutting the door. Try somewhere else. Somewhere far from here. The sixth house belonged to a family with 3 children. Mercy could see them through the window, playing with wooden toys by the fire while their parents watched and smiled. It looked so warm and happy inside that for a moment. She just stood there watching, remembering when she and James had talked about having children of their own. When she finally got up the courage to knock, the father answered. He was a big man with kind eyes, and for a moment Mercy thought maybe this time would be different. Please, sir, she said quickly, before he could shut the door. I'm not asking for money or anything valuable. Just a piece of bread, or maybe some soup if you have extra. I'm going to have a baby soon, and I haven't eaten in 3 days. The man looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him thinking. Behind him, his wife appeared with a baby in her arms. A baby that looked healthy and well-fed. I'm sorry, the man said finally, and he really did sound sorry. But my wife, she's worried about the children. We can't take chances with strangers, especially in times like these. I understand, Mercy said quietly, even though she didn't really understand at all. Thank you for listening. This time, the door closed gently, but it still left her standing alone in the cold. She counted the houses left on this street, only 3 more, and then she would have to try the next street over. If there was a next street, if she had the strength to keep going. The 7th house was dark, with no smoke coming from the chimney. Nobody was home, or maybe they were pretending not to be home. Mercy knocked anyway, but no one answered. She tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. The 8th house had lights on, but when she knocked, a man's voice called out from inside without even opening the door. Whatever you're selling, we don't want it. Go away. I'm not selling anything, Mercy called back. I just need help. Please. Go away, the voice said again, louder this time. Or I'll call the sheriff. Mercy backed away from the door, her heart pounding. She couldn't get arrested. If they put her in jail, what would happen to the baby? What would happen to her? At the 9th house, she could hear a piano playing inside and people singing. It sounded like a family gathering, warm and happy. She knocked softly, not wanting to disturb them too much. A teenage boy opened the door, looked at her, and immediately called over his shoulder. Ma, there's a beggar woman here. An older woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked Mercy up and down with sharp eyes. "We don't have anything for you," she said quickly. "This is a respectable household. We can't have people thinking we encourage this sort of thing." "What sort of thing?" Mercy asked, confused. "Unmarried women having babies," the woman said bluntly. "It's not proper, and it's not our problem." "I was married," Mercy said, her voice getting stronger. "My husband died in a mining accident." "I'm not." But the woman was already closing the door. "That's what they all say," she said. "Find somewhere else to tell your stories." The door slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the piano and singing. Mercy stood there in the falling snow, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The baby hadn't moved in over an hour, and that scared her more than the cold or the hunger. Only one house left on this street. One more chance before she had to move on to the next street, if she could make it that far. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, and the pain in her back was getting worse. She looked at the last house on the street. It was smaller than the others, with a simple wooden fence and a garden that looked like it had been well tended before winter came. Warm light glowed in the windows, and she could see shadows moving inside. This was it, her last chance on this street. She took a deep breath, said a prayer to whatever power might be listening, and started walking toward what might be her final hope. Mercy's knees buckled just 5 steps away from the last house, sending her crashing into the snow with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet night. The cold white powder soaked through her dress instantly, making her gasp as the shock hit her skin. She tried to push herself up, but her arms shook like leaves in a windstorm. The baby inside her suddenly kicked hard, as if angry about the fall. At least it was still moving. That had to be a good sign, even though everything else felt hopeless. She could see the warm glow from the house windows just a few feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. "Help?" she whispered. But the word came out so quietly that even she could barely hear it. The wind was getting stronger, whipping the snow around her like a white tornado. Soon it would cover her completely, and by morning, someone would find a frozen woman and her unborn baby buried in the drift. She thought about James again, about how he used to say she was the strongest person he knew. "You could survive anything, Mercy girl," he told her once after she'd fought off a wild dog that was trying to get into their chicken coop. "You've got fire in you that won't go out." But the fire felt pretty dim right now. Her whole body was going numb, starting with her fingers and toes and creeping up toward her heart. She knew what that meant. She'd seen animals freeze to death before, and it always started the same way. Using every bit of strength she had left, she tried one more time to call for help. "Please!" she shouted, putting everything she had into that one word. "Somebody help me!" The front door of the house flew open so fast it banged against the wall. Light spilled out across the snow, and a woman appeared in the doorway. She had gray hair twisted up in a bun and wore a simple brown dress with an apron tied around her waist. But it was her face that made Mercy's heart jump with hope, kind eyes that went wide with shock when they saw her. "Dear Lord in heaven," the woman breathed, then turned back toward the house. "Benjamin, come quick. There's a woman out here." Heavy footsteps thundered across the wooden floor inside, and then a tall man appeared beside the woman. He had a beard streaked with gray and hands that looked strong from years of hard work. Without saying a word, he rushed down the steps and knelt beside Mercy in the snow. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. "What's your name?" "Mercy," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Mercy Whitmore." "Well, Mercy Whitmore," the man said, sliding his arms under her carefully. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, even though she knew she was heavy with the baby. The woman, his wife probably, held the door open wide and guided them inside. The warmth hit Mercy like a soft blanket, making her skin tingle as feelings started to come back. The house smelled like cinnamon and bread, with a hint of wood smoke from the fireplace. It was the most wonderful smell in the world. They carried her to a chair beside the wood stove, where the heat was strongest. The woman immediately started fussing over her, pulling off her wet shawl and wrapping a thick quilt around her shoulders. "Benjamin, put the kettle on," the woman said without taking her eyes off Mercy. She needs something warm to drink right away. Then she knelt down beside the chair and looked into Mercy's face. I'm Martha, and this is my husband Benjamin. You're safe now, dear. Safe and warm. Mercy tried to say thank you, but the words got stuck in her throat. She'd been turned away so many times that she'd almost forgotten what kindness looked like. It felt strange and wonderful and scary all at the same time. Martha seemed to understand without words. She patted Mercy's hand gently and said, "You don't need to talk right now. Just rest and get warm. There'll be time for talking later." Benjamin came back with a steaming cup of something that smelled like herbs and honey. "Chamomile tea," he said, helping her hold the cup steady. "My grandmother's recipe. It'll help you relax." The tea was the most delicious thing Mercy had ever tasted. It warmed her from the inside out, making her realize just how cold she'd really been. As the warmth spread through her body, the baby started moving again, little flutters that felt like butterfly wings. "When is your baby due?" Martha asked softly. "Soon," Mercy whispered. "Maybe 2 weeks," the doctor said. "Before he—" She stopped, not ready to talk about James yet. Martha nodded like she understood. "And you've been traveling? In this weather?" Mercy nodded, suddenly ashamed. What kind of mother put her unborn baby in danger like this? What kind of woman ended up begging at strangers' doors? "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said quietly. "My husband died in a mining accident, and they took our house. I've been walking for weeks, trying to find work or just someone who might help." Benjamin and Martha exchanged a look that Mercy couldn't quite read. There was something passing between them, some kind of silent conversation that married people could have without words. "Well," Martha said finally, "you found someone. Benjamin, would you bring one of my nightgowns? This poor girl needs to get out of these wet clothes." "You don't understand," Mercy said quickly. "I don't have any money to pay you. I can't give you anything in return." Martha smiled, and it was the first real smile Mercy had seen in weeks. Who said anything about payment? Sometimes people help each other just because it's the right thing to do. As Benjamin disappeared down a hallway, Martha helped Mercy to her feet. "There's a small room in the back where you can rest. It's not fancy, but it's warm and private." "I can't take your room," Mercy protested. "It's not our room," Martha said. Well, it was meant for someone else, but it's empty now. Might as well put it to good use." There was something sad in Martha's voice when she said that, but Mercy was too tired and grateful to ask questions. As they walked slowly toward the back of the house, she noticed things about her surroundings. The carefully tended furniture, the family photos on the walls, the sense that this was a home where people had been happy. The back room was small but cozy, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt and a window that looked out onto what must be a garden in spring. There was even a small dresser and a rocking chair in the corner. "This is perfect," Mercy breathed. "Too perfect for someone like me." Martha turned to face her, and her expression was serious but kind. "Mercy Whitmore, I don't know what's happened to you or what you've been told about yourself, but you listen to me. Every person deserves a warm place to sleep and food in their belly. That includes you, and it includes your baby." Benjamin appeared in the doorway with a soft cotton nightgown and a basin of warm water. "Everything you need to get cleaned up," he said. "Martha's heating some soup for you too." After they left her alone, Mercy sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room in wonder. When was the last time she'd been somewhere that felt safe? When was the last time strangers had shown her such kindness without wanting something in return? She changed into the clean nightgown, which smelled like lavender and sunshine. The warm water felt amazing on her face and hands, washing away weeks of dirt and tears. For the first time since James died, she felt almost human again. But even as gratitude filled her heart, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. This was too good to be true. People didn't just take in pregnant strangers out of the goodness of their hearts. There had to be a catch. There always was. Martha appeared in the doorway carrying a wooden tray that made Mercy's mouth water instantly. The smell of chicken soup filled the small room, rich and warm and more wonderful than any fancy perfume. Along with the soup, there was fresh bread still warm from the oven, a pat of real butter, and a glass of cold milk. "I hope you're hungry," Martha said, setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in quite some time." Mercy stared at the food, hardly believing it was real. "This is too much," she whispered. "I can't take all this from you." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly, sitting down in the rocking chair. "You're eating for two now. That baby needs good food to grow strong." The first spoonful of soup was like heaven. Mercy had to force herself to eat slowly, even though every instinct told her to gobble it all down as fast as she could. The chicken was tender, the vegetables were perfectly cooked, and the broth was seasoned with herbs she couldn't name but that tasted like comfort itself. "This is the best soup I've ever had," she said between careful spoonfuls. Martha smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "It was my daughter's favorite recipe. She always said I made it better than anyone." "Your daughter?" Mercy asked, then immediately worried she was being too nosy. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right," Martha said quietly. "Her name was Lucy. She would have been about your age now if—" She stopped and looked out the window at the falling snow. Mercy set down her spoon, sensing there was a story here that mattered. "What happened to her?" "She died 3 winters ago," Martha said, her voice steady but sad. "Fever took her, and the baby she was carrying. It was her first child, and she was so excited about becoming a mother." The words hit Mercy like a physical blow. She put her hand on her own belly, suddenly understanding why this room had been empty, why Martha and Benjamin had been so quick to help her. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I can't imagine losing a child." "Neither could I until it happened," Martha replied. "For a long time after, I couldn't bear to come in this room. Benjamin wanted to use it for storage, but I wouldn't let him. It felt too much like giving up on her memory." "And now?" Mercy asked gently. Martha looked at her with eyes that held both sadness and something that might have been hope. "Now I think maybe Lucy would want this room to help another young mother. Maybe that's why you ended up on our doorstep tonight." The idea was both comforting and frightening. Mercy had never been a religious person, but the thought that someone who had died might somehow be looking out for her and her baby made her feel less alone in the world. "Tell me about her," Mercy said, taking another sip of the warm soup. Martha's face brightened, and for the next hour, she shared stories about Lucy. How she'd been born during a blizzard worse than tonight's storm. How she'd learned to walk by chasing the barn cats around the yard. How she'd met her husband at a church social and fallen in love with him before the evening was over. "She had your spirit," Martha said eventually. "That determination to keep going no matter what life threw at her. I see it in your eyes." "I don't feel very determined right now," Mercy admitted. "I feel scared and lost and like I've made nothing but mistakes." "Every mother feels that way sometimes," Martha said gently. "Even the ones who seem to have everything figured out. The secret is that nobody really knows what they're doing. We all just try our best and hope it's enough." Benjamin appeared in the doorway, carrying an armload of extra blankets. "Getting cold out there," he said, setting them on the dresser. "Storm's getting worse. Good thing you made it to shelter when you did." As if to prove his point, the wind howled around the house, rattling the windows and making the walls creak. Mercy shivered, thinking about how close she'd come to being caught in that storm with nowhere to go. "Benjamin," Martha said, "would you bring some more wood for the stove? I want to make sure Mercy stays warm tonight." After he left, Martha leaned forward in the rocking chair. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what will you do after the baby comes? Do you have family somewhere? Friends who might help?" It was the question Mercy had been dreading, the one she'd been trying not to think about during all those long days of walking. "I don't know," she said honestly. "James was all the family I had. His parents died before I met him and mine." She shrugged. "They didn't approve of him, said he was beneath our station. We haven't spoken since I married him." "What about work?" Martha asked. "What did you do before you were married?" "I worked in a dress shop," Mercy said. But that was back in St. Louis, and the owner made it clear that married women weren't welcome. Said we should be home taking care of our husbands instead of taking jobs away from single girls who needed them. Martha made a disgusted sound. Some people have very narrow ideas about what women should and shouldn't do. What about you? Mercy asked, curious. Did you ever work outside the home? I was a teacher before I married Benjamin, Martha said with a smile. Taught at the one-room schoolhouse here in town for 5 years. Best job I ever had, even though it didn't pay much. Why did you stop? Same reason you did, I suppose. People expected married women to stay home. And when Lucy came along, Martha's expression grew soft. Well, being her mother became the most important job in the world. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Mercy finished every drop of the soup and both pieces of bread, feeling more satisfied than she had in weeks. The baby seemed happy too, moving around gently like it was settling in for a good night's sleep. Martha, she said eventually, why are you helping me? Really, you don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. Martha was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly back and forth. Do you believe in signs? She asked finally. I'm not sure, Mercy said honestly. 3 months ago, I was cleaning out this room, finally ready to pack away Lucy's things. I found a letter she'd started writing to her unborn baby, talking about all the things she wanted to teach them, all the love she had waiting. Martha's voice grew thick with emotion. At the end, she wrote about how she hoped that if something ever happened to her, someone would take care of mothers and babies who needed help. Mercy felt tears prick her eyes. And then I showed up. Then you showed up, Martha agreed. On the worst night of the year, carrying a baby that needs to be born soon. If that's not a sign, I don't know what is. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the small room, Mercy felt safer than she had since James died. Maybe Martha was right about signs. Maybe Lucy really was watching over them somehow. Or maybe it was just luck, good luck for once, instead of the bad luck that had been following her around for weeks. Either way, she was grateful. And for the first time in a long time, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything might turn out all right after all. 3 sharp knocks on the front door at dawn shattered the peaceful quiet of the house like glass hitting stone. Mercy jolted awake in the small bed, her heart pounding as she heard angry voices outside mixed with the sound of heavy boots on the wooden porch. Through the thin walls, she could make out words that made her blood turn cold. Vagrant, trouble, and worst of all, get rid of her. She struggled to sit up, her pregnant belly making every movement awkward and slow. The baby seemed to sense her fear, kicking restlessly as if trying to escape whatever danger was coming. From the main room, she heard Benjamin's calm voice trying to reason with whoever was at the door. But the angry voices only got louder. We know you took in that beggar woman, a man's voice boomed. Mrs. Caldwell saw her collapse in your yard last night. This is a respectable neighborhood, Holloway. We can't have people like that bringing down our property values. Mercy's hands shook as she reached for her dress, which Martha had cleaned and mended while she slept. Property values? Was that really what these people cared about when a pregnant woman almost froze to death? She'd known people could be cruel, but this level of coldness still shocked her. Martha's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Since when do we turn away people in need, Harold Preston? Your own grandmother would roll over in her grave if she heard you talking like this. That's different, the man Harold shot back. My grandmother helped respectable people who fell on hard times. Not whatever this woman is. What exactly do you think she is? Benjamin asked, and Mercy could hear the warning tone in his voice. We heard about her from the folks over in Millerville, another voice chimed in. This one belonged to a woman who sounded like she'd been sucking on lemons. They say she was asking for handouts there too, spinning some sob story about a dead husband. Mercy pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. They were talking about her like she was some kind of criminal, like grief and poverty were crimes instead of tragedies that could happen to anyone. And even if her story is true, Harold continued, what kind of decent woman ends up in a situation like this? Where's her family? Her friends? People don't end up alone unless they've done something to deserve it. That did it. Mercy couldn't stay hidden while these people tore apart her character and made Martha and Benjamin suffer for their kindness. She wrapped Martha's robe around herself and walked as steadily as she could toward the front room. Martha was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, looking like a mother bear protecting her cubs. Benjamin stood beside her, his usually gentle face hard with anger. On the porch, Mercy could see 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in fine clothes that marked them as the wealthy folks from the big houses she'd been turned away from yesterday. "If you want to talk about me," Mercy said, stepping into view, "maybe you should talk to me instead of about me." The group on the porch went quiet, staring at her like she was some kind of wild animal that had wandered into town. One of the women, a thin lady with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face, looked her up and down with obvious disgust. "Well," the woman said, "I suppose you're going to tell us some sad tale about how you ended up in this condition." "My condition?" Mercy repeated, her voice getting stronger with every word. "You mean being pregnant? That's not a condition, ma'am. That's a blessing. And yes, I do have a story. My husband James was killed in a mine collapse 6 weeks ago. The company kicked me out of our house the next day because I couldn't pay the rent without his wages." "Convenient story," Harold muttered. "Convenient." Mercy's voice rose. "You think it's convenient that my husband is dead? That I lost our home and everything we owned? That I've been walking for weeks in the cold, being turned away by people who think they're better than me?" One of the other men shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we're not trying to be cruel, but you have to understand our position. We have families to think about, children. We can't just let any stranger into our neighborhood." "I'm not asking to move into your neighborhood," Mercy said. "I didn't ask for anything except a little help when I was freezing to death. And these good people," she gestured to Martha and Benjamin, "were kind enough to give it to me. For one night, maybe," the tight-faced woman said. "But you can't expect to stay here permanently. The Holloways have their own reputation to think about." Martha stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "My reputation is just fine. Thank you very much, Mrs. Caldwell. And it's not your business who I choose to help." "It becomes our business when it affects the whole community," Mrs. Caldwell snapped back. "What happens when word gets out that Copper Falls welcomes vagrants? We'll have every beggar and drifter in the territory showing up at our doors." "Heaven forbid we should help people in need," Benjamin said dryly. Harold pointed a thick finger at Mercy. "You mark my words, Holloway. That woman is trouble. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but trouble always follows people like her." "People like me?" Mercy stepped closer to the door, anger giving her strength she didn't know she had. "What exactly are people like me, Mr. Preston? Widows? Poor folks? People who've had bad luck? People who don't know their place?" Mrs. Caldwell said coldly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mercy looked at each face on the porch, seeing the mixture of fear, disgust, and superiority that she'd become all too familiar with over the past weeks. These people had probably never gone hungry a day in their lives, never slept in the cold, never had to beg for basic kindness from strangers. "My place," Mercy said quietly, "is wherever decent people are willing to treat me like a human being. If that's not here in your fine neighborhood, then I'm sorry for you, because that says a lot more about your character than it does about mine." Mrs. Caldwell's face turned red. "How dare you lecture us about character? You're nothing but a—" "That's enough." Benjamin's voice cut through her words like an axe through wood. "I think you've all said quite enough. This is my property, and I'll decide who's welcome here." "You're making a mistake, Holloway," Harold warned. "Mark my words, you'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," Benjamin said, "is that it took me this long to tell you what I really think of your Christian charity." After the group stomped off the porch and disappeared down the street, Martha put her arm around Mercy's shoulders. "Don't you pay them any mind," she said softly. "They're just scared of anything that reminds them how quickly their comfortable lives could change." But Mercy was shaking, and not from the cold. "They'll make trouble for you now," she said. Because of me. Maybe I should leave before. You're not going anywhere, Martha said firmly. Not in your condition, and not because of small-minded people who've forgotten what it means to be neighborly. Benjamin nodded agreement, but Mercy could see the worry in his eyes. Harold Preston hadn't been making idle threats. In a small town like this, powerful people could make life very difficult for anyone who crossed them. As they stood there in the doorway watching the snow fall, Mercy realized that her arrival had done more than just save her own life. It had forced everyone in this quiet little town to choose sides, to decide what kind of people they really were when tested. The question was, how many more people would choose to be like Harold Preston and Mrs. Caldwell, and how many would choose to be like Martha and Benjamin? And what would happen to all of them when the real test came? The real test came sooner than anyone expected, arriving in the form of Sheriff Tom Morrison just as Martha was hanging wet laundry on the line behind the house. Mercy watched through the kitchen window as the tall, weathered man in a badge dismounted from his horse and walked slowly toward where Martha stood with a basket of clothes at her feet. "Morning, Martha," the sheriff said, tipping his hat politely. "Mind if I have a word?" Martha straightened up, clothespins still in her hand. "Morning, Tom. What brings you out here so early?" "Well," the sheriff said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like a man uncomfortable with his mission. "I've been getting some complaints about a woman you folks have taken in." From her spot by the window, Mercy felt her heart sink into her stomach. She'd been at Martha and Benjamin's house for 3 days now, 3 wonderful days of warm food, comfortable sleep, and genuine kindness. She should have known it was too good to last. "What kind of complaints?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Harold Preston came by my office yesterday," Sheriff Morrison said. "Claims this woman might be wanted for theft over in Millerville. Says there's been talk." Mercy gripped the window sill so hard her knuckles went white. Theft? She'd never stolen anything in her life, not even when she was starving. The accusation hit her like a physical blow, made worse by the fact that she couldn't defend herself against something that wasn't true. "Tom Morrison," Martha said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You've known me for 15 years. Do you really think I'd harbor a thief in my home?" The sheriff held up his hands. "Now, Martha, I'm not saying I believe it, but when folks make official complaints, I have to look into them. It's my job." "Your job is to protect innocent people," Martha shot back. "Not to persecute them because they're poor and pregnant." Through the kitchen door, Mercy could see Benjamin working in his shop, unaware of what was happening in the backyard. She wanted to run to him, to hide behind his calm strength, but her legs felt like they were made of water. "Can I at least talk to her?" Sheriff Morrison asked. "Let her tell her side of things? If she's innocent like you say, then she's got nothing to worry about." Martha looked toward the house, and Mercy stepped back from the window quickly. But it was too late. Martha had seen her watching. Their eyes met through the glass, and Martha gave her a small nod that seemed to say, "It's going to be all right." A few minutes later, Mercy found herself sitting at Martha's kitchen table across from Sheriff Morrison, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she poured him a cup of coffee. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that reminded her a little of her father. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "I need to ask you some questions about your time in Millerville. Were you there about 2 weeks ago?" "Yes," Mercy said quietly. "I stopped there for one night, looking for work or help." "Did you go to the church there? St. Mary's?" Mercy nodded. "The pastor let me sleep in the back room for one night, but I left early the next morning. I didn't want to be a burden." Sheriff Morrison made a note on a piece of paper. "And you didn't take anything? No money from the collection box? No food from their pantry?" "No." The word came out louder than Mercy intended. "I would never steal from a church. I would never steal from anyone." "Easy now," the sheriff said, holding up his hand. "I believe you, but someone took $20 from that collection box the morning after you left. The pastor noticed it was missing and remembered you'd been there." Mercy felt the world spinning around her. $20 was more money than she'd seen in months, but the idea of stealing it, especially from a church that had shown her kindness, made her feel sick. "I didn't take it," she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I swear on my unborn baby's life, I didn't take that money." Martha, who had been standing quietly by the stove, suddenly spoke up. "Tom, who else knew this woman had been at the church?" The sheriff looked up from his notes. "Well, the pastor mentioned it to a few people." "Why?" "Because," Martha said, "it seems awfully convenient that money goes missing right after a stranger passes through town. Makes it real easy to blame someone who can't defend herself." Sheriff Morrison frowned. "What are you getting at, Martha?" "I'm getting at the fact that maybe someone in Millerville has been stealing from that church for a while, and Mercy here just provided them with a perfect scapegoat." The idea hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Mercy had never thought about it that way, but Martha was right. It would be easy to blame a pregnant drifter for a crime someone else committed. "Can you prove where you were that morning?" Sheriff Morrison asked Mercy. "Anyone who saw you leave town?" Mercy racked her brain, trying to remember details from that awful morning when she'd been turned away from yet another place. "There was a woman," she said slowly, "an older lady with a vegetable cart. She gave me an apple and told me the road to Copper Falls was safer than the mountain route." "What did she look like?" "Gray hair in braids, a scar on her left hand. She said her name was—" Mercy closed her eyes, concentrating. "Mrs. Henley. She said she'd lost a daughter in childbirth and wanted to help me for her sake." Sheriff Morrison wrote down the information. "I'll send a wire to Millerville. See if anyone knows this Mrs. Henley. If she can vouch for when you left town, that should clear things up." "And if she can't?" Mercy asked, though she was afraid of the answer. The sheriff's expression grew serious. "Then I might have to take you back to Millerville to face the charges. At least until we can sort this mess out." The thought of being locked up, especially with the baby coming soon, terrified Mercy more than anything she'd faced yet. "Please," she whispered, "I'm telling the truth. I've never stolen anything in my life." "I believe you," Sheriff Morrison said, standing up from the table, "and I'm going to do everything I can to prove it. But in the meantime, you need to stay put. Don't leave town. Don't do anything that might make you look guilty." After he left, Mercy sat at the table staring into her coffee cup, feeling like her world was falling apart all over again. Just when she'd started to believe that maybe her luck was changing, that maybe she could build a new life for herself and her baby, everything was crashing down around her. "It's going to be all right," Martha said, sitting down beside her and taking her hand. "Tom Morrison is a good man. He'll find the truth." "What if he doesn't?" Mercy asked. "What if they decide I'm guilty anyway? What happens to my baby then?" Martha squeezed her hand tighter. "Then Benjamin and I will make sure that baby is loved and cared for, no matter what happens to you. That's a promise." The words should have been comforting, but they only made Mercy cry harder. She'd been trying so hard to build a life for herself and her child, to prove that she was worth something despite what the world seemed to think. Now it felt like she was right back where she started, alone, afraid, and running out of hope. But as she sat there in Martha's warm kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of Benjamin's hammer ringing from his workshop, she realized something important. Even if the worst happened, even if she ended up in jail or worse, her baby would be safe. Martha and Benjamin would love this child the way they'd loved their own daughter. It wasn't the life she dreamed of, but it was better than anything she dared hope for just a week ago. Sometimes that had to be enough. The sound of horses galloping hard toward the house at full speed made everyone freeze where they stood. Mercy dropped the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir Martha's soup, her heart hammering against her ribs as she counted the hoofbeats. At least 4 riders, maybe more, coming fast like they were chasing something or someone. Through the front window, she could see a cloud of dust rising from the road, and in the middle of it, Sheriff Morrison riding harder than she'd ever seen a man ride. Behind him came 3 other riders she didn't recognize, their faces grim and determined as they pulled their horses to a stop in front of the house. "Martha," the sheriff called out, not even bothering to dismount. "I need to speak to Mrs. Whitmore right now. It's urgent." Benjamin appeared from his workshop, hammer still in his hand, looking ready for trouble. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, her face calm but her eyes worried. "What's happened, Tom?" she asked. "Good news and bad news," the sheriff said, finally sliding down from his horse. "The good news is that Mrs. Henley remembered Mercy real well. Says she saw her leave Millerville around dawn, walking toward Copper Falls. That puts her miles away when the money was stolen." Mercy felt her knees go weak with relief. She grabbed onto the doorframe to keep from falling, tears of joy starting to flow down her cheeks. She wasn't going to jail. Her baby would be born free. "What's the bad news?" Benjamin asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected. "The bad news," Sheriff Morrison said grimly, "is that Harold Preston and his friends have been stirring up trouble all over the county. They sent telegrams to 3 different towns, claiming Mercy is part of some gang of thieves that's been working the territory." One of the other riders, a man with a deputy's badge, spoke up. "We've got reports of angry mobs forming in 2 towns over. They're saying they won't let any more vagrant criminals settle in their communities." Mercy felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "But you just said I was innocent." "You are innocent," Sheriff Morrison said quickly. "But the truth doesn't always travel as fast as lies do. And some folks are more interested in having someone to blame than they are in finding out what really happened." Martha's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. "What does this mean for Mercy?" "It means," the sheriff said heavily, "that staying here might not be safe much longer. Preston's been telling people that as long as she's in Copper Falls, more undesirables will follow. He's got folks scared that their property values will drop, that their children won't be safe." "That's ridiculous," Benjamin said angrily. "Mercy's never hurt anyone in her life." "I know that and you know that," Sheriff Morrison replied. "But fear makes people do stupid things. And right now there's a lot of fear going around." The second rider, a young man who looked barely old enough to be wearing a badge, cleared his throat nervously. "Sheriff, there's something else. We got word that a group from Millerville is heading this way. About 20 men, maybe more. They're saying they want to clean up the territory and make sure justice is done." Mercy sank down onto the porch steps, her hand automatically going to her belly. The baby was moving restlessly, as if sensing her distress. "They want to hurt me," she whispered, "even though I didn't do anything wrong." "Not if I can help it," Sheriff Morrison said firmly. "But we need to be smart about this. These men aren't interested in a fair trial or listening to evidence. They've already made up their minds." Martha sat down beside Mercy and put an arm around her shoulders. "There has to be somewhere safe she can go. Someone who would take her in." "Actually," the young deputy said, "there might be. My aunt runs a boarding house about 50 miles north of here, up in Pine Ridge. She's a tough old bird who doesn't scare easy, and she's got no patience for bullies." "Pine Ridge is awfully far," Martha said worriedly. "And with the baby coming soon." "The baby's not due for another week or 2, Mercy said, though privately she wasn't so sure. She'd been having odd pains on and off for the past day, but she'd been trying to ignore them. Sheriff Morrison looked at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering. "We've got maybe 6 hours before that mob gets here, assuming they don't stop to rest. If we're going to move her, it has to be now." "I don't want to run," Mercy said suddenly, surprising everyone including herself. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being chased away from every place I try to make a home." "Mercy," Benjamin said gently, "this isn't about giving up. This is about staying alive long enough to raise your child." "He's right," Martha added. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is know when to walk away from a fight you can't win." But before Mercy could respond, another sound reached their ears, the distant rumble of many horses moving fast, coming from the south. The mob from Millerville was closer than anyone had expected. "They must have ridden through the night," the sheriff muttered, pulling out his pocket watch. "We're out of time." Mercy struggled to her feet, decision made. "Then I guess I'm going to Pine Ridge." But as she turned toward the house to gather her few belongings, A sharp pain shot through her lower back and around to her belly, so strong it made her gasp and grab onto the porch railing. "What is it?" Martha asked immediately at her side. I think," Mercy panted, waiting for the pain to pass. "I think the baby might be coming." The words fell into the morning air like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Martha's face went white, Benjamin started muttering under his breath, and Sheriff Morrison looked like he wanted to shoot something. "How long between pains?" Martha asked, instantly taking charge. "They've been coming and going since yesterday," Mercy admitted. "But this one was much stronger." Another pain hit, making her double over with a cry she couldn't hold back. This time there was no denying it. The baby was definitely coming, and soon. "Well," Sheriff Morrison said grimly, "looks like we're making our stand right here." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses grew louder, and through the trees at the edge of town, they could see the first riders of what looked like a very large and very angry group of men. Martha helped Mercy into the house while Benjamin and the sheriff started making plans to defend them. But as another contraction hit, stronger than the last, Mercy realized that whatever happened next, her baby was going to be born in the middle of the biggest fight of her life. And this time there was nowhere left to run. The baby decided to arrive just as the first angry shouts echoed from the main street, and Mercy found herself caught between the pain of childbirth and the terror of knowing that 20 armed men were riding toward the house with violence on their minds. Martha had transformed into a different person, entirely calm, efficient, and completely focused on the task at hand, even as the sound of horses and angry voices grew closer. "Benjamin," Martha called through the bedroom door. "Boil water and bring me all the clean towels you can find, and send word to Dr. Patterson. Tell him we need him now." "Doc Patterson's out of town," Benjamin called back, his voice tight with stress. "Won't be back until tomorrow." "Then we'll do this ourselves," Martha said firmly, turning back to Mercy. "Women have been having babies without doctors for thousands of years. We can do this." Through the thin walls, Mercy could hear Sheriff Morrison trying to reason with the mob that had gathered in front of the house. His voice carried clearly across the yard, calm but firm as he explained that Mercy had been cleared of all charges. "We don't care about your investigation, Sheriff," a rough voice shouted back. "We know what she is, and we know what needs to be done." "What she is," Sheriff Morrison replied, "is an innocent woman about to give birth. Are you really planning to threaten a woman in labor?" Another contraction hit Mercy like a lightning bolt, making her cry out despite her efforts to stay quiet. She didn't want those men outside to know how vulnerable she was right now, but the pain was too strong to hide. "That's it," Martha said, checking the progress. "The baby's coming fast now. On the next pain, I need you to push as hard as you can." Outside, the argument was getting louder. "Step aside, Morrison," someone demanded. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything that happens in my town concerns me," the sheriff shot back. "And if you think I'm going to let you hurt an innocent woman and her baby, you don't know me very well." "There are 20 of us and 3 of you," another voice called out. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Benjamin's voice joined the conversation, steady and determined. "Sheriff's not alone. Anyone who wants to hurt that girl will have to go through me first." Mercy tried to focus on Martha's instructions, but it was hard to concentrate with so much shouting outside. Another pain came, stronger than any before, and she gripped Martha's hands so tight she was afraid she might break them. "I can see the head," Martha exclaimed, her voice full of excitement despite everything else happening. "One more big push, Mercy. Your baby's almost here." But just as Mercy gathered her strength for the final push, the sound of splintering came from the front of the house. Someone had broken down the front door. "Where is she?" A man's voice boomed through the house. "We know she's in here. You men get out of my house right now." Benjamin's voice was angrier than Mercy had ever heard it. "You have no right to be here. We have every right to protect our communities from criminals," the voice replied. "Now stand aside." Heavy footsteps thundered across the wooden floor, heading toward the back of the house where Mercy lay in the most vulnerable moment of her life. But before they could reach the bedroom, another voice cut through the chaos. A woman's voice, strong and commanding. "What in the blazes is going on here?" The footsteps stopped. Through her pain, Mercy heard surprised murmurs and the sound of someone backing away from the door. "Mrs. Patterson," Sheriff Morrison said, and Mercy could hear the relief in his voice. "Thank goodness you're here. I was visiting my sister in town when I heard all this commotion." The woman's voice continued. "Harold Preston, you should be ashamed of yourself, barging into people's homes like some kind of outlaw. Now see here, Abigail." Harold's voice had lost some of its bluster. "This woman is a wanted criminal. We have every right." "She's a cleared suspect," Mrs. Patterson interrupted. "Tom Morrison just told me the whole story. The only crime being committed here is you men terrorizing a woman in childbirth." Another contraction hit, and this time Mercy couldn't hold back her scream. The sound seemed to cut through all the arguing like a knife through cloth. "Good Lord," Mrs. Patterson breathed. "That baby's coming right now. All of you men get out of this house immediately. This is no place for such nonsense." "We're not leaving until," Harold started to say. "Until what?" Mrs. Patterson's voice turned dangerous. "Until you've traumatized a laboring mother? Until you've endangered an innocent baby? Harold Preston, I've known you since you were in diapers, and your mother would box your ears if she could see what you're doing right now." The room fell silent except for Mercy's labored breathing. Mrs. Patterson seemed to have the kind of authority that even angry mobs respected. "The baby's crowning," Martha whispered urgently. "Mercy, you need to push now, no matter what's happening out there." Mercy bore down with everything she had, pouring all her fear and pain and determination into bringing her child safely into the world. She thought about James, about how much he would have wanted to see this moment. She thought about Martha and Benjamin, who had risked everything to protect her. She thought about all the doors that had been slammed in her face, and how she was about to open the most important door of all, the one that would make her a mother. With a final, tremendous effort, she pushed her baby into the world. The cry that filled the room was small but strong, the sound of new life announcing itself to a world that hadn't always been kind. Martha wrapped the baby quickly and placed the tiny bundle on Mercy's chest. "It's a girl," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "A beautiful, perfect little girl." Mercy looked down at her daughter's red, wrinkled face and felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. All the pain, all the fear, all the rejection she'd endured over the past months suddenly seemed worth it for this one moment. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." From the front room, she could hear Mrs. Patterson still lecturing the men about proper Christian behavior and the importance of protecting mothers and children. One by one, she heard them leaving, their voices growing fainter as they walked away from the house. But Mercy barely noticed. She was completely absorbed in studying every tiny detail of her daughter's face, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle she held in her arms. "What will you name her?" Martha asked softly. Mercy thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope, because that's what this little girl represented. Hope for a better future. Hope that love could triumph over hatred. Hope that kindness still existed in a world that often seemed cruel." And as she held her daughter close, listening to the sounds of the angry mob finally dispersing and normal life returning to the house, Mercy realized something important. She had found more than just shelter with Martha and Benjamin. She had found a family, a community of people willing to stand up for what was right. Her journey as a beggar was over. Her journey as a mother was just beginning. 6 weeks after Hope's dramatic birth, Mercy stood at the kitchen window watching her baby sleep peacefully in the wooden cradle Benjamin had carved, when she spotted a familiar figure walking up the path, Mrs. Patterson, carrying what looked like an official envelope and wearing the serious expression that usually meant important news was coming. The older woman knocked gently and entered without waiting for an answer, as had become her habit since she'd helped chase away the mob on the day Hope was born. She'd become an unexpected ally, visiting regularly to check on both mother and baby, and somehow managing to spread word around town that anyone who had problems with Mercy would have to answer to her personally. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her usual chair at the kitchen table. "How's our little princess today?" "She's perfect," Mercy said, though she could tell from Mrs. Patterson's expression that this wasn't just a social visit. "What's that you're carrying?" Mrs. Patterson set the envelope on the table with the careful movements of someone handling something precious. "This came for you on yesterday's mail coach. From St. Louis." Mercy's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told anyone in St. Louis where she was, hadn't written to anyone since James died. The only people who might send her mail were her parents, and they'd made it clear when she married James that she was no longer welcome in their lives. "I don't understand," she said, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the envelope. "Who would write to me?" "Only one way to find out," Mrs. Patterson said gently. The return address confirmed Mercy's suspicions. It was from her father's law office. She tore open the envelope with trembling fingers, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to her parents? Were they finally ready to forgive her for marrying beneath their social station? As she read the formal legal language, her face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "What is it?" Mrs. Patterson asked, leaning forward with concern. It's unbelievable," Mercy said, her voice shaking. "My father's lawyer says they've heard about my unfortunate circumstances and want to offer help." "That sounds like good news," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" Mercy's voice was getting stronger, fueled by indignation. "But listen to this. They want to take Hope back to St. Louis to be raised properly by my parents. They say they'll provide her with education, social connections, and a chance at a respectable life that I obviously can't give her." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. "And what about you?" "Oh, they've thought of that too," Mercy said bitterly. "They've found me a position as a governess with a family in Boston. Far away from Hope, far away from anyone who might know about my shameful past. They say it's the best solution for everyone involved." The baby stirred in her cradle, making the soft mewing sounds that meant she'd be waking up soon. Mercy automatically moved toward her, but Mrs. Patterson held up a hand. "Let me hold her for a minute," the older woman said. "You need to think about this with a clear head." As Mrs. Patterson lifted Hope from her cradle, Mercy sank into a chair and read the letter again, hoping she'd misunderstood something. But the meaning was crystal clear. Her parents wanted to take her daughter and send her away to work as a servant in some stranger's house. "They think I'm not good enough to raise my own child," she said quietly. "They think that because I'm poor, because I had to beg for help, I'm somehow unfit to be a mother." "What do you think?" Mrs. Patterson asked, gently rocking Hope. "I think," Mercy said, her voice growing stronger, "that my parents have always cared more about what other people think than about what's right. They disowned me for marrying a man they thought was beneath us, and now they want to take my daughter because they think I'm beneath her." Martha appeared in the doorway, flour on her hands from the morning's baking. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said. "What's this about your parents?" Mercy handed her the letter, watching Martha's expression change from curiosity to outrage as she read. "Of all the nerve," Martha muttered. "Where were these people when you were freezing in the snow? Where were they when you needed help the most?" "Probably counting their money and worrying about their reputation," Mercy said. "They didn't want anything to do with me when I was married to a poor miner. But now that I have a child, they can mold into their idea of a proper lady." Benjamin's voice came from the doorway. "Sounds like they want to fix a problem they helped create." "The question is," Mrs. Patterson said, still holding Hope, "what are you going to do about it?" Mercy looked around the room at these three people who had become her family over the past few weeks. Martha, who had opened her door when everyone else had slammed theirs shut. Benjamin, who had defended her against an angry mob. Mrs. Patterson, who had used her social standing to protect them all. They had given her something her own parents never had, unconditional love and acceptance. "I'm going to write them back," she said finally. "And I'm going to tell them exactly what I think of their offer." "Are you sure?" Martha asked gently. They're your parents, and they do have resources that could help Hope in the future. Resources, yes, Mercy agreed. But not love. Not the kind of love that matters. She gestured around the humble kitchen. Look where I am right now. A few months ago, I was homeless and starving. These people took me in, protected me, helped me bring Hope into the world safely. They didn't care about my social status or my bank account. They cared about me as a person. Hope started to fuss, and Mrs. Patterson handed her back to Mercy. The moment the baby settled into her mother's arms, she quieted, as if she knew she was exactly where she belonged. My parents think money and social position are the most important things you can give a child, Mercy continued, looking down at Hope's peaceful face. But I think love, kindness, and the knowledge that you're wanted exactly as you are matter more than all the fancy education in the world. So what will you tell them? Benjamin asked. Mercy was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she smiled, the first truly happy smile any of them had seen from her since she'd arrived. I'm going to tell them that Hope already has everything she needs. She has a mother who loves her, and a community that will help raise her with values that actually matter. And if that's not good enough for them, she shrugged, then that's their loss, not ours. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together. Good for you, dear. It takes courage to stand up to family, especially when they think they know what's best for you. I learned something important these past few months, Mercy said. Your worth as a person isn't determined by how much money you have or what family name you carry. It's determined by how you treat others, especially when they can't do anything for you in return. As if to emphasize her point, Hope opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother, her tiny face serious and alert. In that moment, Mercy knew she was making the right choice. Her parents had offered her daughter wealth and social standing, but they couldn't offer her the one thing that mattered most. A family that would love her unconditionally, no matter what storms life might bring. And that, Mercy realized, was worth more than all the money in the world. 2 years later, on a bright spring morning that painted the Montana mountains in shades of green and gold, Mercy stood in the doorway of what was now officially her own little house, the cottage Benjamin had built for her and Hope right next to his and Martha's property, close enough for family but far enough for independence. Hope, now a sturdy toddler with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin, was chasing butterflies in the garden, while Martha hung laundry on the line and hummed an old hymn. The sight filled Mercy with a contentment she'd never imagined possible during those dark days when she'd wandered from door to door, begging for scraps of kindness. Mama, look! Hope called out, pointing at a bright yellow butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger. Pretty, very pretty, sweetheart, Mercy called back, marveling as she did every day at the miracle of her daughter's existence. Hope was healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who adored her. She was learning to read from Martha, picking up carpentry skills from Benjamin, and developing the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was cherished exactly as she was. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Sheriff Morrison standing on her porch, but this time he was smiling instead of wearing the worried expression that had marked their earlier encounters. Morning, Mercy, he said, tipping his hat. Mind if I come in? Got some news you might find interesting. Of course, she said, leading him into her small but comfortable living room. Through the window, she could see Hope had convinced Martha to help her catch butterflies, and both of them were laughing as they chased the colorful creatures around the garden. What kind of news? Mercy asked, settling into the rocking chair Benjamin had made for her. The kind that might finally put some old ghosts to rest, Sheriff Morrison said. Remember that business about the missing church money in Millerville? The theft you were accused of? Mercy nodded, though the memory still made her stomach tighten. What about it? Well, they caught the real thief last week. Turns out it was the pastor's own nephew. Been stealing from churches all over the territory for months. He finally got caught red-handed in a town about 100 miles south of here. Relief washed over Mercy like cool water on a hot day. So everyone knows I was innocent? Everyone knows, Sheriff Morrison confirmed. In fact, the pastor in Millerville asked me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. It's an official apology, along with a donation for you and Hope. Seems his conscience has been bothering him something fierce since he realized how wrong he was about you. Mercy opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a letter of apology and $25 more money than she'd seen since James died. "There's more," Sheriff Morrison continued. "Word's gotten around about what really happened, about how you were treated by folks who should have known better. Some of the other churches in the territory have taken up a collection. They want to do something to make up for the way you were treated." "That's very kind," Mercy said, though she wasn't sure how she felt about charity, even well-meaning charity. She'd worked hard to build her independence over the past 2 years. "It's not charity," Sheriff Morrison said, as if reading her thoughts. "It's justice, and recognition of the fact that you handled yourself with more grace and dignity than most folks would have managed." Through the window, Mercy could see Mrs. Patterson approaching the garden, carrying what looked like a basket of fresh bread. Over the past 2 years, she'd become Hope's unofficial grandmother, spoiling her with treats and stories and teaching her the kind of social graces that would serve her well in any situation. "Sheriff," Mercy said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Do you think people really change? I mean, Harold Preston and Mrs. Caldwell and all those folks who wanted to run me out of town. Do you think they learned anything from all this?" Sheriff Morrison was quiet for a moment, considering. "Some did," he said finally. "Mrs. Caldwell still crosses the street when she sees you coming, but she did send a baby blanket when Hope was born. Harold Preston, well, he's still Harold Preston, but some of the others have come around. They see how well you've done for yourself, how good Hope is turning out, and it's made them think about what really matters. And what about the people who helped me? Martha and Benjamin, you, Mrs. Patterson? What about them? Do you think they knew what they were getting into when they decided to stand up for me?" Sheriff Morrison smiled. "I think they knew exactly what they were getting into. They saw someone who needed help, and they gave it because that's who they are. The fact that you turned out to be worth their faith in you, well, that's just the cherry on top." A burst of laughter from the garden drew their attention to the window, where Hope was now trying to teach Martha how to hop on one foot. The sight made both adults smile. "You know," Sheriff Morrison said, "I've been thinking about that night when you first arrived in town, about how close you came to freezing to death in that snowstorm. I try not to think about it too much," Mercy admitted. "It still scares me." "What scares me," the sheriff said, "is thinking about what this town would have lost if Martha and Benjamin hadn't opened their door. Hope wouldn't be here, brightening everyone's day. You wouldn't be here, showing us all what real strength looks like. Sometimes I think that storm didn't bring you to us by accident. You think it was meant to be? I think," Sheriff Morrison said, standing up to leave, "that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things that happen to us. You lost your husband, your home, your old life, but you found something else. A family that chose you, a community that values you, and the knowledge that you're stronger than anything life can throw at you." After he left, Mercy sat in her rocking chair and watched her daughter play in the garden with Martha and Mrs. Patterson. Hope was chattering away in the mixture of words and gibberish that 2-year-olds used, her face bright with joy and curiosity about the world around her. This wasn't the life Mercy had planned when she married James. It wasn't the life she dreamed of during those long, cold nights when she'd walked from town to town, begging for help. But it was a good life, maybe even a better life than the one she'd lost. She thought about the letter from her parents that she'd answered 2 years ago, politely but firmly declining their offer to take Hope. She'd never heard from them again, and while that hurt sometimes, she knew she'd made the right choice. Hope ran toward the house, her arms outstretched, calling "Mama, Mama," with the pure joy that only children could manage. Mercy scooped her up and held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of sunshine and flowers that always seemed to cling to her daughter's hair. "I love you, little one," she whispered. "Love you too, Mama," Hope said, then wiggled to be put down so she could continue her important work of chasing butterflies. As Mercy watched her daughter run back to the garden, she realized something important. She'd spent so many months believing that her worth was determined by other people's opinions of her, whether they thought she was respectable enough, wealthy enough, good enough to deserve their help. But worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you carried inside yourself. Something that grew stronger every time you chose kindness over bitterness, hope over despair, love over fear. She had walked through the darkest winter of her life and emerged into spring. Not unchanged, but transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she'd ever been before. And that transformation had started with a single act of kindness from strangers who saw her not as a problem to be solved or a burden to be endured, but as a human being deserving of love and respect. Sometimes that was all it took to change everything.